The air was crisp as she stepped off the plane, the cool breeze brushing against her face. New Zealand had always felt like a distant dream, a place she'd only seen in postcards and heard about in passing conversations. Yet here she was, thousands of miles from home, standing outside her nephew's house with nothing but a suitcase and a heart full of uncertainty. She took a slow breath, steadying herself before knocking twice on the wooden door. Her pulse quickened. It had been years since she'd last seen him, once a lively, wide-eyed boy who clung to her stories and laughed at her silly jokes. Now he was a grown man in his early 20s, someone she barely knew anymore. The door creaked open, and there he stood, taller than she remembered. His features had sharpened with age, but his smile, that boyish, familiar grin, remained unchanged. "Auntie," he greeted. His voice filled with warmth as he pulled her into a tight embrace. For a fleeting moment, time rewound. She could almost see the little boy who used to run to her, arms wide open, his laughter echoing in the backyard. But as they stepped inside, reality settled in. He was no longer that child, and she was no longer the woman who had promised to always be there for him. The house smelled of fresh coffee and old books, a comforting mix that wrapped around her like a familiar blanket. They settled in the living room, a steaming cup of tea in her hands as they began catching up. He spoke about his life, long work hours that left him drained, friendships that faded over time, dreams that once burned bright but now flickered uncertainly in the distance. His voice wavered when he spoke of feeling stuck, as if life had lost its rhythm. "You know," she said softly, watching him closely, "I remember when you were just a kid, fearless, always chasing after what you wanted." He smiled at that, but his eyes, deep searching, betrayed his doubt. Days passed, and the house grew warmer, not just from the crackling fireplace, but from the conversations that stretched long into the night. They cooked together, laughed over old memories, and found solace in each other's company. She noticed how much he had changed, the way he listened intently, how he remembered details she had long forgotten. One evening they sat on the porch, the sky melting into hues of gold and violet. "You always believed in me," he murmured, his voice quiet but steady. "Even when I didn't." She turned to him, her smile soft. "You gave me reasons to." Her visit had been meant to be short, just a quick reunion before returning to her own life. But each day stretched longer, wrapped in an unspoken comfort neither of them wanted to disrupt. Yet, beneath the warmth, she sensed something else, something deeper, more complex. Sometimes his gaze lingered a little too long. Other times his words held a softness that felt different. She brushed those thoughts aside. Surely she was imagining things. They were family after all. That was all this was. But late at night, alone in the dim glow of the living room lamp, her mind betrayed her. She replayed their conversations, the way his eyes searched hers, the quiet admiration in his voice. A feeling stirred in her chest, something confusing, something undeniable. "Stop overthinking," she scolded herself. "This isn't what you think it is." The next morning, she woke to the sound of dishes clinking in the kitchen. He was already up, busy making breakfast. "You didn't have to," she said, touched by the simple gesture as he placed a plate in front of her. "I figured you could use a break," he replied with a smile. They ate quietly at first, but soon their conversation flowed again. He opened up about his struggles, feeling pressured at work, friendships that never seemed to last, the constant weight of expectations. "I just don't know if I'm doing anything right," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Without thinking, she reached across the table, her fingers wrapping gently around his hand. "You're doing better than you think." His eyes softened, and for a moment, an unmistakable warmth settled between them. Realizing it too late, she quickly pulled away, clearing her throat. Over the next few days, they spent more time together, wandering nearby trails, exchanging old stories, slipping into an ease that felt natural, yet dangerously close. He reminisced about his childhood, the times she'd visited, how she always brought him his favorite sweets, how her letters once felt like lifelines. "You've always been there," he said one evening as they sat on the back porch. Even when I didn't say it, I appreciated you. His words lingered, stirring something inside her, something she wished she could ignore. Then one night everything changed. They watched a movie together, curled up on opposite ends of the couch. But somewhere along the way, he leaned his head against her shoulder. She froze, her heart hammering. His weight was warm, his breathing steady. And she didn't move. When the credits rolled, she shifted slightly, her pulse racing. I should get some sleep, she murmured. Yeah, he replied, his voice softer than usual. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She tried to convince herself it was nothing. Just a moment of comfort. Just family. But deep down she knew, something had shifted. The next morning she put distance between them. She needed to regain control of her thoughts, to remind herself of what was right. But every time their eyes met, the warmth returned. Unspoken, undeniable. One afternoon she stood by the window, watching him outside. He was fixing the garden fence, his sleeves rolled up, focus unwavering. And something in her chest ached. Get a grip, she muttered to herself. But no matter how hard she tried, those feelings wouldn't fade. That evening, as she stood in the kitchen making tea, she heard the front door open. His footsteps approached and suddenly, he was there, too close, his presence wrapping around her like a whisper. You've been quiet today, he said. I've just been thinking, she replied too quickly. About what? She forced a smile. Nothing important. But he didn't step back. Instead, his fingers brushed against her arm, a touch so light yet it sent her pulse into chaos. You know, he murmured, I feel like I can talk to you about anything. She swallowed hard. That's what family is for. I know, he said. But his eyes, deep, searching, told her there was something more. She stepped away, gripping the edge of the counter. I need some air. The next morning she packed her bags. You don't have to go, he said, his voice quiet, almost pleading. She forced a smile. I do. For a moment he just stood there, conflicted. I didn't mean to make things uncomfortable. I know, she said gently. But I think some space is what we both need. His expression was unreadable, but when he reached for her hand, she let him hold it. I'll miss you, he admitted. I'll miss you too, she whispered. As he drove her to the airport, the car was silent. When they arrived, he stood beside her, hands in his pockets. You'll visit again, right? Of course, she smiled, but her heart knew the truth. Not any time soon. On the flight home, she stared out the window, the sky stretching endlessly before her. She knew she'd made the right choice. Some feelings weren't meant to be pursued. But even as she closed her eyes, she couldn't stop thinking about him.